Ikenna Okonjo was not a man you interrupted. He was 44, soft-spoken, and so rich that people lowered their voices before they understood why. His father had pulled crude oil out of the Niger Delta and turned it into a fortune, and Ikenna had inherited all of it without ever once wondering whether he deserved it. He simply assumed he did. So when he looked across his own garden one Friday afternoon at the old man kneeling beside the rumbling generator and decided to make that man into a joke for the amusement of a banker visiting from Dubai, nobody at that table thought to stop him. They never did. 5 million naira, he said, sliding the envelope across the table. Let's see what you do with it. He went back inside and forgot the old man existed for 11 months and 22 days. What that old man built in those 11 months is the reason I am telling you this story. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who never bothered to learn your name, stay with me until the end and subscribe right now because this one earns it. The envelope sat on the iron garden table in the 4 o'clock sun for a while before the old man touched it. He was not finished. He had been tracing a fault along the conduit that ran from the generator house to the east wing of the mansion on Bourdion Road in Ikoyi, and he had conjunction boxes to check before the light turned the color that made fine wires hard to see. So he finished the two junction boxes. He wiped the contact spray off his fingers with the rag he kept folded in his back pocket. He stood, and standing took longer than it used to, because his right hip had been speaking to him since the Harmattan of 2021, and the doctor at the clinic in Obalende had told him it was the kind of thing a man could either rest or keep working, and that resting was a luxury, and that he, the doctor, could see which one the old man had chosen just by watching him walk into the room. Then the old man walked to the table, picked up the envelope with one hand, and put it in the front pocket of his work trousers without opening it. His name was Madua Buchi Eze. Everyone who knew him called him Madu, which was most of a name that means a person is not God, that only God is without limit, and his mother had chosen it on purpose the year he was born because she had buried 2 children before him and wanted the third one's name to be an argument with heaven. He was 59 years old. He stood 168 centimeters and weighed 71 kilograms. Though he had weighed 76 the previous dry season before the price of gari climbed and the extra weekend repair jobs in Surulere thinned out. And a man eats less when the work eats less. He had kept the generators and the wiring of the Okonjo estate alive for 8 years and 4 months. He came at 6 in the morning. He left by 3 in the afternoon. He knew the electrical bones of that house the way a man knows the breathing of someone he sleeps. Sighed by sound, by the small change before the large one, by the thing that is wrong a week before it becomes the thing that fails. He wore the same 3 shirts in rotation, all of them pale, all of them once a dark color, washed so many times they had arrived at a shade somewhere between gray and the memory of gray. His hands were the hands of a man who had worked with current and copper and the insides of engines for 31 years. And they showed every one of those years the knuckles thickened, 2-fingered permanently, ridged from an arc that had caught him in 1998 and taught him a lesson he had never needed to be taught twice. He kept them clean. He carried a sliver of blue soap in his bag and washed at the outside tap before he went anywhere near the main house, which nobody required of him and nobody noticed, but which he did anyway, because his father had told him that a man who enters another man's house should enter it presentable, no matter what he is carrying or why. His father had told him many things. Madhu had written some of them in a small notebook bound in cracked brown leather that he kept on the ledge above his bed between a tin box and a Bible with a spine held together by tape. He had not written anything new in it for 3 years, because his father had died in the rains of 2022 in the General Hospital at Enugu. 4 days after his chest gave out in the night, And in one of the last clear hours the man had, when the medicine pulled the fog back just far enough, he had taken Madhu's wrist in a grip that still surprised him and said, "A current you cannot see still kills a careless man. Respect what you cannot see." Madhu had not written it down. He did not need to. It had gone to a place ink could not reach. The man who had handed him the envelope, Ikenna Okonjo, was the only surviving son of Chief Bonaventure Okonjo, who had taken a single marketing license in 1976 and turned it, over 40 years, into Okonjo Energy and Petroleum, a group with refineries and storage terminals and a fleet of vessels and a stake in 2 banks and a net worth at the last accounting that the financial press put somewhere north of 1.5 billion American dollars. Ikenna had inherited the Lagos estate and a seat on the board the year his father died. He drove a black Land Cruiser with a plate that spelled a shortened version of his own name, and he held what he believed was a clear-eyed view of the people who worked on his property. Not cruel, not personal, categorical. They were staff. They filled a function. When the function ran correctly, he saw no reason to remark on it. And when it did not, he let the house manager handle it, because that was what the house manager was for. He had given Madhu the 5 million on an impulse that started as entertainment. The banker from Dubai had complaining, half laughing, about the noise of the generators rolling through the garden while they tried to talk, and Ikenna had said, without looking up from his phone, "You want to see something? These people, you give one of them 5 million naira. By next week, it is palm wine and a funeral. They have no idea what to do with money. Watch." He had gone inside, taken the envelope from the safe in his study where he kept cash for the things he did not want on a card, and walked it out to the garden. The banker had been pulled away by a phone call before Ikenna came back. Ikenna gave the envelope to the old man anyway, because the thought had already formed, and because 5 million naira against the size bet of what moved him in an ordinary morning was the cost of a long lunch. He said, "Let's see what you do with it. The way you say a thing you do not expect to hear answered." Madhu walked the 3 kilometers home. He could have taken a danfo from the junction, but the fare was the fare, and the walk was the walk, and his hip was going to hurt either way. He let himself into the single room he rented off Awolowo Road, in a yard behind a vulcanizer's shed, and he sat on the edge of the bed beside the tin box that held his papers, and he opened the envelope. Inside were bundles of 1,000 naira notes, new, the bank band still crisp around each one. 5 million. He counted it twice. The second count came out the same as the first, which he had known it would, but counting it twice was a thing his hands wanted to do, and he let them. Then he put it back in the envelope, put the envelope in the tin, lay down on the bed, and looked at the ceiling for a very long time. He thought about what he knew. He had been building a picture for years, not the kind you frame, the kind you assemble out of 1,000 mornings, watching one specific machine answer one specific set of demands, the kind that lives behind the eyes and can be read off like a meter. He knew the 2 500 kVA generators in the Okonjo generator house ran in alternation, one on, one resting, around the clock all year. He knew that at night, when the house was asleep and the only load was the cold rooms and the security lights and the standby pumps, the demand fell to something like 40 or 50 kilovolt amperes, and that a 500 kVA machine asked to carry 40 kVA is a 500 kVA machine being slowly ruined, the diesel half burning, the unburned fuel washing down the cylinder walls and glazing them, wet stacking, the engineers called it, the exhaust running cool and black, a machine eating money to damage itself. He knew the house burned through diesel at a rate that would have frightened the man who paid for it, if the man who paid for it had ever once asked. He knew that there was nothing connected to that house that could carry the small night load by itself, no bank of batteries, no inverter sized for the quiet hours, so that the generators ran through the night to keep a few freezers cold, the way you might keep a lorry's engine running all night to charge a phone. He knew the soil of that problem, the way he knew the soil of every problem he had ever stood inside of for 8 years. And he knew something else, the thing under the thing. In 31 years of working the houses and the small businesses and the workshops of Lagos, he had watched fortunes of equipment die from bad maintenance and worse decisions from the ignorance of men who could not tell a healthy machine from a sick one, and paid people who looked busy instead of people who knew. He had watched diesel bills the size of a teacher's annual salary disappear every single month into generators that were the wrong answer to the question being asked. He watched it for years. He knew there was a market for what he knew. He had known it for a long time. He had simply never known what to do about it. He sat up. He took the envelope out of the tin one more time and held the bundles under the one bulb that lit the room. And he turned them in his hands, and he said out loud, "To nobody. To the room. All right." He did not go to work the next morning. He had not taken a day for himself in 14 months. The Monday he did not arrive at the estate on Bourdillon Road was the first absence the house manager had to write in her log in all that time. He had sent her a message the night before, taking personal days. Back on Thursday, Mrs. Ballaghan read it at 6 minutes 6, and then she rang down to the gate to ask the morning guard whether the old electrician had said anything on his way out on Friday, anything at all, and the guard said no. He had left the way he always left, tools locked in the generator house, the rag folded, the gate latched behind him. "Good evening, sir," and gone. He spent the Monday in a place most people in Lagos did not know existed, a reading room on the second floor of a technical institute off Herbert Macaulay Way, where a retired man named Sylvester Anyoku had been going every Monday and Thursday for the better part of a decade. Engineer Sly, the younger men called him, though he was past 70 now and had not signed off on a drawing in 15 years. He had spent his career with the National Power Authority back when it was still called something else. And he had been let go in one of the reorganizations the way a great many competent men had been let go in those years, with a handshake and a pension that the naira had been quietly eating ever since. He read to keep the rust off. He had told Madhu once, over a shared bench and 2 warm sachets of water, that the technical collection in that room was better than anything Madhu would find on a phone if a man knew where to look and was patient enough to look there. Madhu was patient. He sat with Sly for most of the day and read about load. He read about the thing he had felt in his hands for years, but had never had the words for, the relationship between the size of a generator and the size of the demand it was asked to serve, and how the efficiency of the whole arrangement collapsed when the two were badly matched. He read about a number called the load factor, the share of a machine's capacity actually in use, and how a diesel generator wanted to run somewhere above 70% of its rating to burn clean and live long, and how everything below about 30% was a slow act of self-harm. He found in a worn government pamphlet on standby power for commercial premises the exact words for the black exhaust and the glazed cylinders he had seen in the Okanjo machines, and he sat with the pamphlet open on his knee for a moment. The way a man sits when a thing he has only suspected is confirmed in print by someone who has never met him. Then he read about the other half of the answer. He read about inverters, the boxes that turn the direct current sitting in a battery into the alternating current a house runs on, and the difference, which he had heard arguments about for years without ever settling them, between the cheap kind that produce a rough, stepped, squared off wave that makes fans hum and damages anything with a sensitive board inside it, and the proper kind that produce a clean, rounded wave indistinguishable from the grid. He read about batteries, the heavy lead acid kind he already knew, the kind that wanted careful charging and died early if you abused them, and the newer lithium kind, lighter, longer lived, far more expensive at the counter, and, if you did the arithmetic across their whole life, sometimes cheaper than the lead. He read about solar panels and the modest, unglamorous truth of them, that a few of them on a roof feeding a battery through the day could carry a small night load for years on sunlight that fell whether anyone collected it or not. He read for 6 hours. When the English in a paragraph climbed past where his schooling could follow, and his schooling had ended at 15 when his father's wages could no longer stretch around school fees and a growing family both, he marked the place with his thumb and waited until Sly surfaced from his own book and asked. Sly explained. Sly was the kind of man who lit up at being asked a real question by someone who actually wanted the answer, which did not happen to him as often as it once had. He explained the load factor with a pencil and the back of an envelope. He explained why a hybrid arrangement, generator and solar, and battery working in shifts beat a generator alone for any premises with a load that rose and fell across the day. He drew the shape of it, and Madhu took out the brown leather notebook that until that day had held only his father's words, and he wrote down the explanations in his own hand, in the margins and on the blank back pages, the numbers and the rules and the small drawings, so that for the first time in 3 years there was new ink in the book sitting under the old. He came back on Thursday. He did not tell anyone where he had been. But before Thursday, there were Tuesday and Wednesday, and on those 2 days, he went looking for the place where the thing he was going to build would have to live. He needed somewhere to work, somewhere to test, somewhere to keep stock and batteries out of the rain, and he found it the way men of his means find things, not through an agent, but through a chain of people who each knew the next link. He found it through Mama Ogechi. Mama Ogechi sold spare parts and engine oil and brake fluid and the small electrical odds and ends from a roadside stall on the expressway service road that she had been running since 1999, and she knew everything that happened to anything mechanical or foreign within a radius of 3 kilometers, because everything within that radius eventually needed a fan belt or a fuse and came to her to get it. Madhu had bought from her for years. He told her what he was looking for: a covered space, not large, with power he could draw from, and a yard he could put panels in to test, and a rent a man could survive while he found his feet. Mama Ogechi thought about it with her arms folded for the length of time it took a customer to buy a liter of oil, and then she told him about a former mechanic's shed off the Owarunshoki road, a man who had gone to his village to bury his mother and decided not to come back, and whose brother was looking to let the space for whatever he could get rather than watch it fill with rust. The space was a single open bay with a corrugated roof, a hard-packed laterite yard behind it that caught the morning sun on its eastern side, a standpipe, and a single phase of mains that worked when the grid worked, which in that part of Lagos was a matter of hours, not days. The rent was 60,000 naira a month. Madhu walked the yard, looked at where the sun fell, and where it would fall at noon, put his hand flat against the laterite to feel how much heat it was holding, and stood for a while in the open bay listening to the expressway. He signed for 6 months. He paid the first 3 from the envelope, and the brother counted the notes on the hood of a dead car, with the particular care of a man who has not held that much cash in a while, and they shook hands, and it was done. He gave the thing a name before it had a sign, because a name typed on a page was something a man could hand to other men, and a sign was something a man bought once he had customers to justify it. He went to a business center on the Owar Unshoki Road and paid 150 naira to have one page printed, and the page had his full name across the top, Maduabuchi Eze, and under it the name of the thing, Ease Power Solutions, and under that, a short list of what the thing did: energy audits for homes and businesses, inverter and battery installation, solar hybrid systems, generator right sizing and preventive maintenance. He chose every word on that list himself, And the phrase energy audit he had taken straight from a paragraph in the reading room because he had understood, sitting on that bench, that the most valuable thing he could sell was not a box or a panel, but the answer to a question almost nobody was asking, which was simply this: how much is your power actually costing you? And how much of that is waste? He left copies of the page with Engineer Sly, who read it through his glasses and nodded slowly and said only, "The right sizing is the part they will not understand, and the part they need most," which Madhu already knew but was glad to hear said. He left a copy with Mama Ogechi, who propped it against a tin of grease where customers would see it. He left two more with men he had crossed paths with across the years, contractors who maintained the gardens and grounds and machinery hanshi of houses in Ikoi and Lekki, and who he knew got asked, now and then by their employers, whether they knew anyone who could look at a generator that was drinking too much. Then he went back to the estate on Thursday at 6 in the morning, exactly, his tools in his bag, the soap in the outer pocket, laterite dust under two of his nails from turning over the test ground in the dark on Tuesday and Wednesday nights, because the street light on the Owaron Shoki Road cut out at 8 and a man works by what light he has. He said nothing to anyone about where he had been. He went to the generator house and he picked up the fault he had set on Friday, the trace along the conduit to the east wing, and he found the bad junction and he fixed it. And the east wing lights stopped their flicker, and nobody in the house noticed they had been flickering or that they had stopped, because that was the nature of the work, that it was only ever visible in its absence. This story is already doing something in your chest. I can feel it from here. Stay with me, because what Matabuchi built on that laterite yard in the 11 months that followed is the part nobody inside the walls on Bordelon Road saw coming, and the part where it turns is the part you will want to have earned. The first month was not the month he had pictured. He had pictured movement, a thing taking shape under his hands at a speed he could see. What he got instead was a lesson in how long the distance is between knowing a thing and building it. He spent 410,000 naira of the envelope on his first proper inverter, and he bought it wrong. He bought it at the Alaba market in the great roaring electronics warren on the western edge of the city, where you can find anything ever manufactured and a great many things only pretending to have been. And he bought a unit that the trader swore was a pure sine wave model, a real one, full rating, and that carried the name of a manufacturer, Madhu, half recognized in lettering that was almost but not quite the lettering of the real thing. He should have known. Some part of him, the part that had handled 10,000 boxes, did know. The way the weight was a little wrong in his hands and the cooling fins were thinner than they should have been. But it was his first big purchase, and the price was good, and he wanted to believe the price was good because it was honest and not because it was a lie. And so he let himself be told what he wanted to hear, which is the oldest way there is to lose money. It ran for 9 days. On the 10th, with a modest load on it, an old refrigerator, and a few lights he had rigged in the bay to test the thing under real conditions, it began to smell faintly, the smell of a board getting hotter than a board should. And then it stopped. And when he opened the case, the insys told the whole story: a transformer wound with too thin wire, and a heatsink too small for the work, and a capacitor that had already swollen and split. It had never been a pure sine wave anything. It had been a square wave unit in a stolen coat. He stood over the open case in the bay for a while, not cursing, because cursing was a thing you did when a problem still had heat in it for you, and this problem had already cooled into a fact. He had lost the better part of 400,000 naira to his own wish to be fooled. He wrote it in the brown notebook that night. Not the loss, the lesson. He wrote that the proper wave is not a claim a man makes, it is a thing a man measures, and that he would carry an instrument from now on and put it on the output of anything before he believed a word about it, and that the cheap one always costs more. Always. There is no exception. The exception is the story the cheap one tells you to make the sale. Then he took the dead unit apart for the parts that were still good, the casing, the fan, the binding posts, because his father had taught him that nothing electrical is ever entirely a loss. There is always copper. There is always a use. And a man who throws away the dead is a man who has never been poor. The second failure cost him more and taught him a colder lesson. A man came to him, introduced by a half acquaintance who said he could bring in lithium battery banks at a price below anything in the Lagos market. Direct Container Direct, the genuine article, and showed Madhu photographs on a phone and a paper that looked like a shipping document and asked for a deposit of 600,000 naira to secure the allocation, half now, half on delivery. The price was very good. The price was, in fact, too good, and Madhu felt the too good of it, the way he had felt the wrong weight of the Alaba inverter. A small voice that he was learning, slowly and expensively, to stop talking himself out of. But he was tired, and the lithium would have leapt his whole project forward by months. And the man had answers for every question, which Madhu would later understand was itself the warning that an honest man stumbles and checks his facts, and an honest man sometimes does not know, and only the practiced ones have an answer ready for everything. Madhu paid the 600,000. He paid it in cash on a Tuesday in the back room of a place near the Mile 12 market and got a handwritten receipt and a date. The date came. The man did not. The phone rang out, and then the phone was off, and then the phone was a recording in a woman's voice saying the number did not exist. Madhu went to the place near Mile 12, and the back room belonged to a man selling foam mattresses who had never heard the name. He went to the half acquaintance who had made the introduction and watched the man's face do the thing a face does when it realizes it has been used as a bridge by people it cannot afford to have been used by. The fear arriving before the apology, and Madhu understood that this one too was a victim, a smaller one, and that there was nothing at the end of this road but more men who had been used. He took it to Mama Ogechi, because Mama Ogechi knew everything, and she made 3 calls from her stall and learned the shape of it within an hour, that the man was one of a small crew that worked the city's edges, selling allocations of goods that did not exist to people building things. That they had done it before and would do it again, and that the 600,000 was gone. Simply and finally gone into the place that money goes when it is taken by people who have made the taking of it their trade. Mama Ogechi told him this plainly, without softening it, because she respected him too much to lie, and Madhu thanked her and walked back to the bay and sat down on the overturned bucket he kept by the door and looked at the laterite yard for a while as the light went, not breed went. He did not despair. I want to be careful about this word, because it is the word the story wants me to use here, and it would not be true. Despair would have required him to believe he had given the thing a fair trial, and it had failed him. And he had not given it a fair trial. He had been open 11 weeks, and a man does not weigh the harvest in the 11th week. He was out close to 1,000,000 naira between the inverter and the deposit, more than he had ever lost at once in his life, and he sat with that. And what he felt was not the bottom falling out, but something narrower and harder, the specific anger of a man who has been made a fool of twice by his own hope. He let himself feel it until it had finished. Then he wrote in the notebook again. He wrote that a price too good is not a gift, it is a hook, and that the bait on a hook is always something you want. He wrote that he would buy the lithium when he could buy it from a face he could find again, and not before. And under that he wrote, in the same hand, a sentence of his father's that he had carried for 40 years, and never had cause to write until that night, that a thief takes your money once, but your suspicion he takes, but your suspicion he takes every day after, if you let him, and that a man must lose the money and keep his openness, or the thief has taken the larger thing. There was a boy by then. His name was Tochi, and he was 19, and he came to Madhu through Mama Ogechi as well, because everything in that part of the city came through Mama Ogechi in the end. Tochi had been 2 years into an electrical engineering program at a polytechnic before the fees defeated his family. The way the fees defeat so many families, not all at once, but in a slow tightening, until the boy is the one who says, quietly, so his mother does not have to, that he will stop for now and go back when things are better, knowing as he says it that for now has a way of becoming always. He had the half education that is in some ways worse than none, the theory without the hands, the formulas without the feel, a boy who could calculate a voltage drop on paper but had never put a meter on a live line and watched the number disagree with his arithmetic and learned, in the disagreeing, what the paper leaves out. Madhu took him on after school and on weekends. And the boy learned fast, faster than Madhu had expected, because the theory was already in him, and all it needed was the hands to come and meet it. And within 3 weeks, Tochi could strip and dress a cable to a standard Madhu did not have to redo, and could read the swing of a clamp meter, and had stopped flinching at the small sounds a working board makes. At the end of the first month, Madhu raised his pay, unasked, to a full rate, because the boy had earned it, and because a man who underpays the people who make him is building his house on a debt that comes due, and because Madhu had spent 8 years being a function in another man's eyes, and had promised himself, somewhere in those years, that anyone who worked beside him would be a person in his. He did not show the boy the inside of the two failures. He told him the lessons, the sine wave, and the too good price, because the lessons were a gift and the boy would need them. But the weight of the loss, the close to 1 million gone, the nights on the bucket, those he carried by himself, because Tochi was 19 and did not need to stand inside the fear of a problem that the older man had already decided to solve. That is a thing you learn about leading, that part of the job is to absorb the fear that would not help the people under you and pass on only the part that would. Then came the night that nearly ended it, and it had nothing to do with money. He was wiring the first real hybrid he had built, a working system in the bay, generator input and solar input, and a battery bank, and the changeover gear that would decide, automatically, which source carried the load moment to moment. And it was the most complex thing he had assembled, and he was building it at night because the days belonged to the estate. He was tired, the particular tiredness of a man past 50 doing fine work by a work light after a full day on his feet, and he reached to land a heavy cable onto a buzzbar he believed he had isolated, and his hand was already moving when something stopped it. It was not a thought. It was older than a thought. It was the grip of his father's hand on his wrist in a hospital in Enugu. A current you cannot see still kills a careless man, and Madhu's own hand froze a centimeter from the bar, and he stood there, the cable lug hanging from his fingers, and made him put it down, and made himself go back and check, properly, with the meter and not with his belief, whether the bar was dead. It was not. He had isolated one source and left the other live, the solar side, which on a sunny afternoon will sit there silent and lethal, with no engine running to warn you it is awake. And if his hand had completed the motion it had started, the cable lug would have landed on a live bar with the heel of his hand against the metal of the frame, and the bay would have filled with a light that has a sound. And Tochi, who was sleeping at his aunt's 2 streets over, would have come in the morning to find what a careless second leaves behind. He sat down on the bucket again. His hands were not steady, and he let them not be steady, and he did not pretend to himself that they were. He had been doing this for 31 years, and the current had reached for him anyway, because that is the entire point his father had been making with the last clear strength in his body, that the danger is not in the wire you respect, it is in the wire you have stopped seeing, and that the day you trust your own hands more than your meter is the day the work has decided how you will die. He waited until the shaking passed. Then he found the live source, and he killed it, all of it, and he put a piece of tape over the isolator with a word written on it so that no hand, his or another's, would energize it without a person first reading the word and remembering. Lockout, the pamphlet had called it. His father had not had a word for it. His father had simply never in 40 years been killed. He finished the hybrid the next evening, in daylight with the boy beside him, and when it ran for the first time, the generator carrying the heavy load, and then the changeover sensing the load fall, and the generator dropping out, and the battery taking the quiet load in a silence so sudden it felt like a held breath. Madhu stood and watched the bank discharge clean into the test load with no engine running at all, the bay quiet, the meter steady, and he understood that he had built the thing he had read about on a bench 3 months before, and that it worked, and that it was his. But the failures and the night had eaten the calendar. By the time the hybrid in the bay ran clean, it was the 4th month, and the phone had rung, but not often, and the money was thin. He had spent, by then, 2,840,000 naira on stock and inverters and the lead acid bank he had finally bought from a dealer he could find again. And the cabling and the changeover gear, and the panels, 6 of them, that now sat on a frame in the laterite yard, tracking the sun across the hard-baked ground. He had spent 650,000 on a second-hand half-ton truck with a cracked side mirror and 291,000 kilometers on the clock and a clutch that needed a firm foot. He had spent the lost million he did not like to count, and he had spent the rest carefully on the parts of a second system, a small demonstration rig he was building. For a reason he had not fully admitted to himself yet, a rig designed to prove, on a meter in naira, what a hybrid could do to the fuel bill of a place that was running a big generator into the ground. He took on work to keep the lights on while he built. He wired an inverter into a chemist's shop 2 streets from the bay so the woman who ran it could keep her fridge cold through the daily outages without burning a generator she could barely afford to feed, and he watched her monthly fuel spend fall by more than half, and she told 3 people. He did a hybrid for a small printing business whose machines hated the rough power of their old square wave unit and kept losing boards, and the clean wave stopped the losses, and the printer told 2 people. And then he did the one that mattered, the one that changed the shape of how he thought about all of it. A clinic on the Owarun Shoki Road. A small private clinic run by a nurse and a visiting doctor that had been losing its cold chain every time the grid went, and the old generator failed to start. Losing vaccines, losing the insulin people had paid for, the doctor rationing what was left and turning people away. Madhu put in a hybrid sized for exactly their load, generator and battery and 4 panels, with the cold room on the battery, so that the fridges never knew the grid had gone. And the first month after, the clinic did not lose a single vial, and the nurse, a woman named Gozi, who had been doing this work in that building for 11 years, on a budget that would have made a richer person weep, took both his hands in both of hers and held them, and did not say anything for a moment. Because there are things the work does that are past thanking. He drove home that evening in the cracked mirror truck, and he understood, somewhere along the expressway with the lights of the city coming up, that the thing he had been treating as a business had a second face he had not been looking at directly, that the knowledge in his hands, the 31 years, and the brown notebook, and the bench in the reading room did not only move money. It kept a clinic's fridges cold. It was the kind of understanding that arrives all at once, but that you realize, when it arrives, you have been walking toward for a long time. And it was in the 5th month, standing in the laterite yard in the early light in front of the demonstration rig he had built, without fully admitting why, watching the meter show the battery carrying a simulated night load with no engine running and the fuel gauge of the idle generator not moving at all, that he finally let himself see what the rig was. He had not built it for a client. He had built it for the house on Bourdion Road. He had built, without naming it, the answer to the exact problem he had been standing inside of for 8 years. The two 500 kVA machines grinding through the night to keep a few freezers cold, the diesel pouring into the dark, the wet stacking, all of it. And he had built the cure and put a meter on it so that no one could argue. He stood in front of the rig for a long time. The sun came up over the eastern edge of the yard the way it had. Every morning he had been turning that ground, and the panels woke and the number on the meter climbed, and Maduabuchi Eze looked at the proof of a thing he had known for years, and had finally, with another man's careless 5 million and his own 31, built into something he could carry through a gate and set down on a terrace and refuse to let anyone pretend was not real. He went to work the next morning at 6. He did the rounds in the generator house, and at 12:30 he walked to the house manager's window and asked for 15 minutes with Mr. Okonjo. Mrs. Balagon looked at him through the window the way she always looked at him, which was not hostile and not warm, but simply the look of a woman performing the function of deciding who reaches the people behind her and who does not. She said Mr. Okonjo was in meetings. She said it the way she said most things to most of the staff, as a closed door with the politeness left on. Madhu said, "I'll leave a note then." She gave him a sheet of paper from the pad on her desk, and he wrote on the window ledge, in the careful hand of a man who learned to write, before he learned that writing could be careless. "Mr. Okonjo, I have built a working hybrid power system, generator and solar and battery, and I have measured what it does. I have an energy audit of this estate that shows what your generators are costing you each month, and how much of that is waste. I would like 15 minutes to show you both, at your convenience. Maduabuchi Eze Power Solutions." He wrote the full name of the business at the bottom the way a man signs his whole name to a letter when he is ready for it to be answered. And he folded the note once and handed it back through the window. And Mrs. Balagon set it on the corner of her desk among the other paper that would reach Mr. Okonjo when it reached him. If it reached him, and Madhu went back to the generator house and finished his day. Ikena Okonjo read the note on a Sunday morning at 14 minutes past 9, and he read it by accident. He had come into the study looking for a different piece of paper. A contract his lawyer wanted, and Mrs. Balagon had left the week's small correspondence stacked on the desk, and the note was on top because it was the most recent thing in the pile, and he picked it up because it had his name on it in a hand he did not recognize. He read it once. The name at the bottom meant nothing to him for a moment. Maduabuchi Eze Power Solutions, and then the word generators did something, turned a key, and the whole afternoon came back. The banker from Dubai, the noise in the garden, the envelope. These people, you give one of them 5 million naira. By next week it is palm wine and a funeral. Watch, he had forgotten it completely. He sat down in the chair behind the desk, the contract his lawyer wanted forgotten in turn, and he read the note a second time, slower. And the thing that moved in him was not quite curiosity and not quite unease, but some compound of the two that he did not have a clean name for. Because Ikena Okonjo was not a man who was often surprised. Surprise, being a thing money, is very good at keeping away from a person, and here was a small surprise sitting in his own hand on a Sunday morning, written by a man he had paid to forget. He sat with it for a while. Then he picked up his phone and told Mrs. Balagon to have the electrician come to the house on Tuesday morning at 8. Madhu arrived on Tuesday at 8 in the cracked mirror truck. In the bed of the truck, roped upright and padded with old cloth, was the demonstration rig, broken down into the pieces a man can carry and rebuild. The inverter and a single block of battery and 2 of the panels on their folding frame, and the changeover gear in a wooden crate. and beside it a second wooden crate that held something heavier than its size. A sheaf of paper in a hard folder, the audit, 8 months of the estate's diesel deliveries and run hours and load readings that Madhu had been quietly recording in the brown notebook across years and had now set out in columns a man could follow. And at the end of the columns, the arithmetic, what the two generators cost to run as they ran now, what a properly sized hybrid would cost to run instead. And the difference between the two, which was the number the whole thing came down to. He carried the pieces to the apron in front of the generator house the way he carried everything, level, both hands, the weight respected. And then he did a thing that took him most of an hour. With Tochi handing him pieces, he assembled the rig on the apron in the morning sun. The panels up and tilted, the battery block wired in, the changeover gear live, the meter on the front of it, where a man standing could read it, and he ran a load off it, a bank of work lights he had brought for the purpose, and he let the generator that fed the estate carry them first. And then he switched the load to the rig, and the work lights did not so much as flicker as they passed from a 500 kVA machine burning diesel to a battery sitting silent in a wooden crate. And the meter showed the draw, and the idle generator's fuel was not moving at all. Akenna came out of the house in a gray polo shirt and stood on the step and watched the work lights burn off a battery in a crate, while a generator the size of a small car sat quiet beside it. He said nothing for a moment. He was a man who priced things for a living, who had grown up at a table where the worth of things was the only real subject. And he was looking at the rig and the meter and doing, behind his face, the arithmetic he had spent his whole life doing, and the arithmetic was arriving somewhere he had not expected it to arrive. Madhu said, "This is what your night load looks like on a hybrid. The generators are running all night now to carry what that battery is carrying." He gestured at the idle machine, the still fuel gauge. "That is the waste, not all of your bill, the waste in your bill." Ikenna walked down off the step. He looked at the panels, at the battery block, at the meter, and then he picked up the hard folder from the crate, the audit, and he opened it, and he read. He read the columns of diesel deliveries, which he had signed for, or his house manager had signed for, every month for years, without once reading them as a number that meant anything. He read the run hours. He read the load readings, the 40 and 50 kVA at night against the 500 kVA machines carrying them. And he read the arithmetic at the end, the cost as it was and the cost as it could be, and the gap between, and the gap was a number large enough that he read it twice, the way Madhu had counted the envelope twice, because some numbers the hand wants to confirm. He read one more thing in the audit, near the back, set apart on its own page, and it was the thing that changed the color of his face. Madhu had not put it there to wound him. He had put it there because it was true and because an honest audit does not leave out the part the client will not enjoy. On that page, Madhu had laid the estate's diesel deliveries against the run hours of the generators, month by month for the 8 months he had records for, and the two columns did not agree. The fuel coming in was more than the machines could have burned, even running wastefully through every night, even wet stacking, even at their worst. The gap was small in any single month, a few hundred liters, the kind of difference a busy man signs past. Across 8 months, it was not small. Across years, Madhu had written in a single dry line under the figures, it would be a second salary. Ikenna stood very still with the page in his hand. He understood it before Madhu said anything, because he had grown up at a table where this exact kind of arithmetic was the family trade, and he knew what it meant when the fuel invoiced did not match the fuel that could have been burned. It meant someone in the chain between the supplier and the tank had been writing down more than arrived, and splitting the difference for years in a compound where the man who paid the bills had never once read the bills as numbers. The facilities contractor who had held the estate's maintenance account before Madhu was ever asked his opinion of anything. The fuel supplier who delivered to the gate. Somewhere between the two of them, a quiet arrangement had been eating Okonjo's money in the dark for longer than the old electrician had even worked there, and it had survived precisely because the only person on the property who could read a generator's appetite the way a doctor reads a pulse had never been asked to look at the books, had never been asked anything, had been a function kneeling in the garden. Madhu said, "I did not put that there to embarrass you, sir." He said it plainly, the way he said everything. "I put it there because if you fix the generators and not that, you will save money and still be robbed. The waste in the machine is one thing. That is another thing. You will want a different person to look at it than me. I only know fuel by how an engine burns it. But the numbers do not lie, and the numbers say more diesel came through that gate than those two machines could have used." Ikenna did not answer for a moment. He was a man who had been lied to by people in suits across boardroom tables and had caught most of it, prided himself on catching it, and he had been robbed for years at his own gate by a thing as simple as a fuel log under his own roof, while he amused visiting bankers with theories about what poor people did with money. The irony of it did not arrive gently. He had told the man from Dubai that these people had no idea what to do with money. And one of these people was standing on his apron, having just shown him that he, Ikenna, was the one who had not been watching his own. He looked at the page, and then he looked at the old man who had handed it to him without triumph, who had in fact tried to soften the handing of it, and he folded the page back into the audit with a care that was new in him. He said, "How long would I have gone on paying it?" Madhu said, "As long as no one read the fuel against the hours. The contractor was not going to read it. He was the one writing it, and he gestured once at the silent generator, at the truck, at the rig. Most things that rob a house go on as long as the house is not looking. That is the whole of how they work. Not cleverness. Just a house that is not looking." There was a silence on the apron, then that was different from the one before it, heavier, because the first silence had been a rich man recalculating the worth of a poor man's morning, and this one was a rich man recalculating something closer to himself. He held the page a moment longer. Then he closed the folder over it, and the closing was careful, the way a man closes a thing he is going to have to deal with and has not yet decided how. He said, "What is Ease Power Solutions?" Madhu said, "My company. A workshop off the Oworonshoki Road. I opened it 6 months ago." Ikenna went quiet. He looked at the truck, at the rig on his apron, at the man standing beside it in a pale shirt washed to the color of memory. And something was rearranging itself behind his eyes, slowly, the way a large thing turns. He said, "With the 5 million." "With the 5 million," Madhu said. "Minus what I have brought you today, which I have invoiced separately at market rate." Ikenna looked at him. Madhu reached into his shirt pocket and took out a folded sheet of paper, an invoice printed at the business center for 150 naira crisp, and he held it out. Ikenna took it. He read it. It was an invoice for the energy audit of the estate, charged at a flat professional rate, and for the demonstration and assessment, and at the bottom it carried a line that read, "Payment terms 30 days, and under that, full hybrid installation quoted separately upon approval, and a total that was, against the gap the audit had just shown him, almost nothing. The cost of confirming a saving many times its size." He stood on his own apron and held the invoice in one hand and the audit in the other, and he looked at the old man, and he looked at the truck with its cracked mirror, and he looked at the work lights burning steady off a silent battery, and he said quietly, almost to himself at last, "You came back." Madhu said, "You told me to let you see what I did with it." There was a long pause. Somewhere over the wall, a generator in a neighboring compound coughed and caught and settled into its drone. The sound of the whole city's particular arrangement with the dark, the sound Madhu had spent 31 years inside of, and a white egret crossed the garden from the direction of the lagoon and folded itself down onto the lawn and stood there on one leg with its neck tucked. perfectly still, the way those birds go still, and for a moment nobody on that apron moved either. Akena Okanjo turned and went into the house. He was gone for a few minutes, and when he came back out, he was holding a check, not a phone with a transfer ready, not a card, but a paper check already written, and the fact that it was already written told Madhu the thing it was meant to tell him, that the man had filled it out, inside, at his desk, before he came back through the door, which meant he had decided before he crossed the room, which meant the decision had been made somewhere in the minute between reading the gap in the audit and standing back up. He held it out. Madhu took it. He folded it once without reading the figure and put it in shirt pocket, in the place the invoice had been, and the not reading of it was not pride and not performance. It was simply a man declining to let the size of a number change the way he stood while another man was watching him stand. Ikena said, "What would it take to do the whole estate? Installation and the maintenance after." Madhu said, "I will need 3 weeks to finish the work I have promised other people. I can begin the full survey the first Monday of next month. I will bring you a written proposal with the sizing and the costing and the saving, and you can decide on the paper, not on the demonstration." Ikena nodded. He looked once more at the rig, at the meter, at the silent battery doing the work of a roaring machine, and then he went back inside, and the screen door settled behind him, and Madhu stood on the apron in the morning sun and began with Tochi to break the rig back down into the pieces a man can carry, panel by panel, the way he had built it, level, both hands, the weight respected, while the egret watched from the lawn and the neighbor's generator droned on over the wall, doing in someone else's compound the exact wasteful thing that Maduabuchi Eze had just been paid to end in this one. He came back the first Monday of the next month with the written proposal, the way he had said he would, and the proposal was a thing of plain pages and honest numbers. The sizing of the system worked out from the estate's real load curve, and not from the size of the client's bank account, which is the temptation in that trade and the thing that ruins it, the seller who sizes the system to the wallet instead of the load. Madhu sized it to the load. He specified a generator a third the size of the two monsters in the house, enough to carry the rare peak when the whole estate ran at once on a bad grid day, and a solar array on the long flat roof of the staff quarters where it would catch the sun all day and offend no one's view, and a lithium bank this time, bought at last from a dealer, with a face and a shop front Madhu could return to, sized to carry the night and the shoulders of the day, and the changeover gear to run the whole shift work of it without a hand ever touching a switch. And he priced the diesel saving against the cost of the system, and that showed the month the saving would have paid for the system entirely, and after that month the saving was simply money the estate would stop burning, year after year, for as long as the sun came up. Ikena read it at his desk with the door open, and he did the thing he did with every document that crossed that desk. He looked for the place where the person on the other side had hidden the part that benefited them at his expense, because that was how every document he had ever signed had been built, with a hidden part, and he could not find it because there was not one. The proposal said what it cost and what it saved, and it sized the system to the house and not to him. And when he understood that, when he understood that the old electrician had quoted him a smaller generator than the ones he already owned, because a smaller generator was the right answer, and not because it was the expensive one, something moved in Ikena Okanjo that does not have a clean business name. The small disorientation of a man who has been handed an honest thing by someone he had filed permanently under a heading that did not include honesty or competence or the capacity to make him, the rich man, look like the one who had not understood his own house. He approved it. He approved it that morning with a signature and a deposit, and he told Mrs. Balagon to give the electrician whatever access the work required. And Mrs. Balagon, who had filtered this man at her window for 8 years, looked at the signed proposal and at the size of the contract and adjusted, in the quiet way that house managers adjust, the category she kept him in. The work took 5 weeks. Madhu and Tochi did most of it, with two more hands Madhu brought in for the heavy days, and he ran it the way he ran everything, slow where slow mattered. The cable runs dressed and labeled, every isolator tagged, the lockout word on every source that could wake without warning because a current you cannot see still kills a careless man, and the estate would be worked on by other hands after his, and those hands needed to be able to read where the danger slept. And when it was commissioned, when the new arrangement took over the running of the house, the first thing anyone noticed was not the saving, which would show itself slowly on the diesel deliveries over the months to come. The first thing anyone noticed was the quiet, because the two great generators stopped running through the night. They stopped running at all except on the rare bad day when the grid failed and the load peaked together, and even then the small right-sized machine carried it, and the monsters sat silent in the generator house, retired, kept only for an emergency that increasingly never came. And the estate, which had hummed and redifted for years, every night, a low mechanical groan that the people who lived there had stopped hearing, the way you stop hearing a thing that is always there, went quiet. The night came, and the house was silent, and the only sound was the lagoon and the insects, and, very faint, the city. I have not told you yet about Adeze. Adeze was Akena's wife, and before she was Akena's wife, she had been a singer, not a famous one, but a real one, a woman with a voice that had filled small rooms in Lagos. And once, before she married, a hall, and she had a room in the east wing of the house that her husband had built out for her years before as a place to record, lined and treated and fitted with everything a voice could want, and she had not used it in 3 years. She had not used it because of the generators. The low groan of the two machines came up through the floor and into the foundations and into the treated walls of that room and sat under everything, a hum no microphone could be told to ignore. And after enough nights of laying down a take and playing it back and hearing, under her own voice, the drone of her husband's diesel, she had stopped. She had closed the room. She had not made the decision as a decision. The way Madhu had not made his decisions as decisions, she had simply stopped going in, and the not going in had hardened over 3 years into a silence of a different kind. The silence of a person who has set down a thing she loved, because the world made the holding of it cost more than she had. The night the house went quiet, she felt it before she woke at some hour and lay in the dark and could not place what was wrong. Because what was wrong was that nothing was wrong, that the groan she had stopped hearing was gone, and its going had left a hole shaped exactly like itself. And in the morning she went into the room she had not entered in 3 years, and she stood in it, and she sang a few notes into the treated air just to hear them. And she recorded them, and she played them back, and under her voice there was nothing. There was only her voice. She sat down in the chair in that room, and she wept, the particular weeping of a person who has been given back a thing she had finished mourning, which is a stranger and harder grief than the first one. And her husband, passing in the corridor, heard her and stopped and did not go in, because some things a man understands he is not the author of. Akena Okonjo knew that his estate looked and ran better than it had in a decade. He knew the diesel deliveries had collapsed to a fraction of what they were, that the number at the bottom of the audit had been true. He knew the generators that had defined the sound of his nights for years sat silent now in their house, and that the old electrician had been the one to silence them. What he did not fully know, what he had no way to know, was the size of what he had been handed. He did not know that the man he had described to a banker as someone who would turn 5 million naira into palm wine and a funeral had, with that exact 5,031,000 years the banker knew nothing about, given back to Akena's own wife, the one thing in that whole vast estate that all of Akena's money had been quietly taking from her: the silence. He did not connect the quiet in his house to the weeping in that room, to the old man in the pale shirt, because the three things lived in three different parts of his understanding, and he had no reason to draw the line between them. But the line was there. The line had been there since the afternoon he slid an envelope across a table to make a stranger into a joke. Ease Power Solutions grew. By the following dry season, Madhu had three more estates in Ikoyi and a contract with a landscape and facilities firm that maintained the grounds of a dozen houses on the island and now sent him every generator that drank too much. He took the second bay behind the first when the brother offered it. Tochi was full-time and had brought in his younger brother, who was 18 and steady-handed, and Madhu was training them both the way his father had trained him: the meter before the belief, the lockout before the work, nothing electrical ever entirely a loss. Mama Ogechi sent him customers without being asked, and Madhu set her a referral arrangement and wrote it on paper and gave her a copy, a small percentage on the work she sent, calculated so that it would not hurt his margin and would last exactly as long as she kept sending, because his father had told him to write agreements as though the other person were your friend and the paper were for strangers. And Madhu had buried his father, but not the things his father said. The old facilities contractor was gone by then. Ikena had not made a public matter of it because public matters cost more than they return, and because a man does not enjoy announcing the size of the hole that was cut in him while he was looking the other way. He had simply brought in a separate person to read the fuel, the way Madhu had told him to. Someone who knew diesel the way Madhu knew current, and the separate person had confirmed in 2 weeks what the old man's single dry line had said. And the contract was ended, quietly, the account closed, the supplier changed. No one was marched off in front of a crowd. The arrangement that had eaten a second salary out of the dark for years ended the way such things end when a house finally starts looking, with a phone call and a final invoice and a name removed from a list, and the only person who ever fully understood what had been stopped, and how, and by whom, was the old electrician who had found it in a column of numbers and handed it over without once raising his voice. He went back to the brown notebook. He had begun writing in it again, somewhere in those months, new things under the old, his father's words, and then his own, the load factor, and the sine wave, and the too good price, and the lockout, and the names of the people who worked beside him now, and the arithmetic of a saving. And once, on a page by itself, the sentence that the whole year had taught him, and that he could not have written before he lived it. That the money had not given him the idea had been growing in him for years in the dark, the way most real things grow, without announcement, without anyone to see, reaching toward a light nobody had pointed out to it. The 5 million had not given him the idea. It had given him the time. That is the part I keep coming back to. Some people are handed money and they spend it on the life they already have, a better version of the same room. And some people are handed money and they spend it on the life they have been quietly preparing for without ever letting themselves call it preparation. The mornings at 6, the notebook, the bench in the reading room, the 31 years of carrying knowledge home in your hands and washing it off at a tap outside another man's gate. The difference between those two people is not talent, it is not luck, and it is not character. In the soft way, people say character when they want to praise someone without naming what the person actually did. The difference is attention. It is what you have been paying attention to for years, while no one was watching and no one was paying you to notice. Maduabuchi Eze had been paying attention to the bones of other people's houses for 31 years, and when the careless 5 million came, he already knew exactly where to put it, because he had been standing at the answer for a very long time, waiting only for the means to reach it. You cannot mock a person out of what they know. You cannot hand someone an envelope as a performance and take back the thing they have been building beside themselves for half their life. The joke is always answered, in the end, by the thing that was never a joke: the slow accumulation, the unglamorous attention, the specific knowledge that a man who only ever sees the surface of a house would never think to look for. Akena Okanjo saw a function kneeling beside a generator. He had no idea he was looking at the only person for kilometers in any direction. Actually, he understood the house he had inherited and what it was costing him and how to stop it. He found out the way the careless always find out, by being handed the answer with an invoice attached. Payment terms 30 days. Maduabuchi Eze keeps his father's notebook on the ledge above his bed, between the tin box and the taped Bible. The egret comes back to the lagoon most evenings, and the room in the east wing of a house on Bourdillon Road has a voice in it again. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. And here is the question I want you to sit with before you go. If someone handed you 5 million naira tomorrow as a joke, not a gift, not an investment, a joke, to prove you would waste it, what would you already know how to build it into? Not what you wish you knew, what you actually know right now from the years you have already lived and the things you have already paid attention to when no one was watching. Tell me below. I read every one of them, and I mean that. A note before you go. The power arrangement in this story, a generator sized to the real load instead of the bank balance, solar panels feeding a battery to carry the quiet hours, the choice to maintain a machine before it fails instead of after, these are not invented. They are the everyday work of competent electricians and power engineers across Nigeria and far beyond it. And the waste this story describes, big generators grinding through the night to carry a load a fraction of their size, is real, and it is burning real money in real compounds tonight. But what is true in one house can be wired differently in another, and electricity is not a thing to learn from a stranger on the internet. A current you cannot see still kills a careless man. If anything here made you look at your own generator or your own bill differently, do not act on what you heard in a video. Sit down with a licensed electrician or a certified power engineer who can see your actual load and your actual wiring. I am not an electrician, and nothing in this story is technical advice. I am a person who wanted to tell a story about the men we file under a heading that does not include the word competent and how expensive that filing turns out to be. The most valuable thing in that compound was never the generators. It was the old man kneeling beside them, and the years no one bothered to ask him about.